But of course, the problem is that for people like me, maybe like you, we're too old to do roots of empathy. So how else can we develop our empathic selves and our empathic capacities? Well, this brings me on to the second habit of highly empathic people, which is to make the imaginative leap. Now, empathy, particularly cognitive empathy, requires that imaginative journeying, an imaginative leap into the minds of others. And the amazing thing about human beings is this. Just by imagining ourselves in somebody else's position, it can expand our concern for them and motivate us to act on their behalves. Now, this is obviously challenging for many reasons. There are many barriers to this imaginative capacity that we have. There are polarizations that divide our society, polarizations around politics or religion and culture. We have everyday prejudices and assumptions about others, which we constantly label people. We label people as benefit scroungers or, lazy refugees or whatever it is. And we need to get beyond these kinds of labels which are fed to us often by toxic media. I mean, I remember in my own experience some years ago where I was walking down one of the streets where I live. And there was this homeless guy who I used to walk past all the time. And I never stopped to talk to him. And he was always kind of muttering in a crazy way to himself. He wore about 6 jackets. He was picking up used cigarette butts and walking about with no shoes in the snow. And I just thought, this is this crazy homeless guy. I was labeling him. One day I stopped to talk to him. And I discovered his name. His name was Alan Human, quite an unusual name. He told me a bit about himself in his own words. He told me that he was crazy, that he'd been sectioned under the Mental Health Act 17 times for paranoid schizophrenia, which he suffered from. But as we continued our conversation, we discovered we also had things in common. We discovered we both studied philosophy at Oxford University, and we both had a great love of pizza, Nietzsche, and Aristotle. So this is the basis of the friendship that we developed, and Alan Human then became a great friend of mine. And it was one of those brilliant examples of where, before that happened, I had thought of myself as quite an open, empathic person, someone who didn't judge others. But I think all of us have assumptions and prejudices about people. I'm no different from anybody else. Life, in a way, is a challenge to overcome those kinds of differences, and Alan Human helped me do that. And someone who was really good at getting beyond these kinds of barriers and prejudices and labels about people was the great Mahatma Gandhi. Just before he died, he said something which is sometimes called Gandhi's talisman, which is all about imagining yourself in the eyes of others and through their perspectives. He said this: whenever you are in doubt, or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man who you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Then you will find your doubts and yourself melting away. Just imagine if that was on the screensaver of every politician and business CEO, or even on your own. I think it's very beautiful and powerful as well. And Gandhi also pointed out that we need to empathize not just with the poorest and the weakest, the down and out, the marginalized. Also, we need to empathize with people whose views we might disagree with our enemies. He famously said, he was a Hindu who said, I'm a Hindu and a Muslim and a Christian and a Jew. So what I think this raises is the question of, how do we take these kind of ideas and put them into practice? How do we make that imaginative leap, particularly into the perspectives of people whose views we might disagree with? Let me tell you a story about Claiborne Paul Ellis, known as C.P. Ellis to his friends. Now, C.P. Ellis was born in 1927 in the United States in Durham in North Carolina. He was from a poor, white, working class family, and he couldn't make ends meet. He couldn't feed his children, he couldn't pay the rent, and he started blaming his problems on African Americans. And like his father before him, he joined the Ku Klux Klan, and he became a leader of the KKK, the Exalted Cyclops. In 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he celebrated with a party. But in 1971, his life went in a new direction. He was invited to a meeting at a local school to discuss and talk about racial problems and racial conflicts in local schools. And he was invited because he was a very prominent member of the local community. He went to this meeting with a machine gun in the back of his truck. And when he was there, to his horror, he was elected as the co-chair of the organising committee along with a civil rights activist called Ann Atwater, who he absolutely hated. And C.P. Ellis and Ann Atwater started having to work together and recruit people onto their organising committee. And a couple of days later, they met up with each other. And Ann Atwater said to C.P. Ellis, she said, I can't get any black folk to join me in this because I'm working with you, a Ku Klux Klansman, a white supremacist. And C.P. Ellis said, the same thing's been happening to me. Nobody wants to work with me because I'm working with somebody like you from the black community. And then Atwater said, my kids came home from school yesterday crying. People were making fun of them because I was working with you. And he said the same thing happened to my kids as well. And basically what started happening was that Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis started realizing that they had things in common. They also realized that they shared the oppression of poverty. And over the 10-day period of this meeting about racial issues in schools, C.P. Ellis started understanding that Ann Atwater really wasn't so different from him. And at the end of this 10-day meeting, he stood up in front of 1,000 people and he tore up his Ku Klux Klan membership card. And C.P. Ellis later became a leader of a cleaners union, which was 70% African American. In fact, one of the things that Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis had in common is they basically had the same job. Ann Atwater was a domestic cleaner in private homes. C.P. Ellis was a local cleaner at a local college. So I think it's an extraordinary example of even people who are the most extreme in their views and prejudices can, particularly through conversation and contact with people different from themselves, overcome those prejudices, overcome those deep divides and build empathic connection. And in fact, I think what the story of C.P. Ellis tells us is that it reflects something in social psychology known as the contact hypothesis or contact theory, which I believe is one of the most powerful findings of the social sciences over the last half century. And basically the idea is this, is that if you bring together people from different backgrounds, racial backgrounds, class backgrounds, religious backgrounds, but bring them together in conditions of relative equality to do something together, like C.P. Ellis and Ann Atwater organising a public meeting together, or bring people together to build a barn or play football together. If you do that, in 96% of cases, you will build empathy and tolerance and respect. Not in all cases, but in most cases. So bring people together in conditions of relative tolerance can have an absolutely extraordinary impact. So contemplating what I've just been talking about, it's worth asking yourself this question. Just to think of a time when a conversation that you had challenged your assumptions about another person and created empathic understanding. Think about one of those examples and ask yourself, how did it happen and why did it matter? How did it happen and why did it matter? What difference did it make in your life?